and he still loses blood, like any normal elf. He awakes. He cannot see, it's hard to breathe, and he cannot move. He hears the rustling of what sounds similar to wagon wheels on cobbled streets. The same cobbled streets that he's known all of his life. The Kingdom of Morana Dorai's cobbled streets. And this continues onward for hours. He's too scared to move, for he knows not of his ability. He thinks that they just knocked him out and failed to kill him. In his panic, he does not realize that his back no longer hurts as bad. It's still tender to him, but it has fully healed. These assassins were sent to kill the entire royal family that night. And they believed they had succeeded. For when the wagon stopped, Petrus could hear and sense two other things being lifted off of the cart, and after a moment he heard a splash, and then another splash. And then he was lifted up. He figured out he was in somewhat of a body bag, held together by rope and covered with gagged and blinded by heavily wound twine. So he gets thrown into the river after a moment. The cold rush fills his head and all of his senses, and then darkness. He was knocked out as he hit the bottom of the river. He awakes to a torrent of noise, water rushing. He manages to free himself from his bindings and swim to the top, his lungs heavy. And as he discovers, once he reaches the top of the water, as he tries to take a breath in, he vomits water, just gallons of it, for his lungs had filled with water, and his body, adapting to whatever needed necessary to survive, was drawing the oxygen out of the water. So he makes his way to the surface, and he stumbles around for a bit along the side, trying to figure out what has happened. He looks around for either of his parents, and because he assumed they would be here with him, but he can't find any sign of them. No other scraps of the same bag that was made to hold him in, or anything. So he looks around into the forest nearby. And what's interesting about this forest, it's not the normal forest of green or orange leaves of autumnal season. It's bleach white bark with cobalt blue leaves. It's very alien, very strange to Petrus. He thinks he might remember something about the trunk, but the leaves are completely foreign to him. So he ventures into the forest a bit. And after a bit of exploring, he sees light. And, you know, it's very strange to see light at this late of night. For it was still very, very late in the night when he woke. And he follows this light, and then he finds himself in a very different area. It's cold. There's nowhere in the kingdom of Murano Dorai that's cold. As he looks around, he sees trees that look completely different. Fir trees with pointed tops. The ground is permafrost and snow covered. This doesn't even look like it's in the same, like, kingdom. Petrus wanders around once more, and he finally sees the light that he was seeing is the sun. And then it hits him. What he just traveled through was the Noctua Silva, a rare, rare forest that appears and disappears with the coming and going of the moon, appearing in a different place every full moon. And it had transported him from the Feywild into the prime material plane. Now, humans at this point were barely a species, barely a speck on the radar that is the Earth. So Petrus, after several months, came to terms with what had happened and tried to make best of his new life in the world that he had stumbled in. Whether it be for better or for worse, he was here now. And he needed to find a way back. He did not know if the Noctua Silva appeared in this realm at all, but he needed to search for it. So then began his days of going around to all the different parts of this planet and searching for the Noctua Silva once more. For the bleached white bark and the cobalt blue leaves. But alas, he could not find it. And to blend in more with the humans, he adapted to their current styles, whether it be 1800s, 1700s, 1500s, 1900s, or the 2000s. He needed to blend in. And with certain hats and, other garbs, he could hide his ears. But eventually, he discovered a tower. And this tower was unlike anything he had seen in the human world. It looked almost elvish, or elven, in nature. And as he advanced towards the tower, it almost seemed to be growing taller, to the point where it looked almost like you could see it from space as he approached the wall. And there was this giant brass door with a huge lion knocker on it. He knocked once, he knocked twice, 3 times, no answer. He knocked one final time, the 4th time, and the door creaked open. And there was a elderly-looking elf. Petrus had scarcely seen other elves. For in this world, elves were known about, for they were not uncommon. But they are heavily prosecuted against. Not prosecuted, that's court. Discriminated against. Because there was an old folk tale that sprang about several millennia ago on how The elves could last so long in their lifespans because they must have sapped the lifespans of other creatures. And that's why they can live so long and the other creatures can't. So to see another elf in a tower so large, so ostentatious, was bewildering to Petrus. He asked the man his name, and the man, very wary of Petrus as well, but after seeing that Petrus himself was an elf, was a bit more trusting. He tells him his name. His name is Eric Yori. And he stumbled into the human realm through an accident of tampering with a genesis of his own. For Eric's genesis is that of transportation. He is extremely adept at transporting both things and people. And through his transportation, he not only transported himself, but his lab and most of his notes, only leaving behind scraps for the royal family to find. Petrus doesn't fully recognize the name because Eric is a few generations back before Petrus. But what Petrus is curious about is how Eric is still alive. And Eric explains that he, being a wizard himself, being extremely adept at arcane arts, while he cannot make himself immortal per se, he can make time not advance as long as he is in the periphery of his tower. Perimeter, not periphery. Christ. But he says that he cannot leave his tower, for it has been too long. And if he were to leave wherever he set up the field for his spell, all of the time that has not advanced for him will catch up to him in an instant. But Petrus tells the tale of his life to Eric, and they find common ground on both being from the kingdom of Morana Dorai, albeit Petrus a bit later in the kingdom's lifespan. And they speak more, and Eric gives Petrus a stone. It's a special stone that allows Eric to communicate with Petrus no matter the distance or any interference, as far as they know. So Petrus takes it, and this was after, of course, Petrus asks the man with the teleport voodoo if he can teleport back to the Feywild, and Eric says no. He has been trying ever since he got here, but he learned to no avail. Traversing planes naturally with magic is something he currently does not possess the knowledge of. But because there is another elf here who is seemingly immortal without a boundary, Eric has newfound vigor and determination to research this more. So Petrus bids Eric a farewell and goes about his life. And is it by this point in the story that Petrus he's very apathetic towards life and how things have gone, because he knew his parents weren't the same as him. And he knew that the kingdom, without a rightful heir, will be thrown in chaos, despair, might even come to ruin. So, he gives up on a bunch of stuff. He abandons all hope that he had to this point of going back or seeing his family once more. But through occasional conversing with Eric, Petrus not only discovers ways to do certain basic spells, such as making a tome never run out of paper, so he can keep writing indefinitely, for he keeps a journal. But also very simple enhancements to spells, such as tweaking the Find Familiar spell to allowing Petrus to see and hear through the eyes of his albino raven. I'm back in. Welcome. I'm still telling a story. But then one day, Petrus receives a call, I guess, from the stone that Eric gave him. Had to get dinner? You're good. With good news. Eric has discovered a way to traverse between the planes. Now, granted, this would have been like fucking page 1 of the original book, right? Because the backstory stuff would have been unlocked, because that's a lot of shit, alright, to just dump on someone. But that would have been like starting page, is like Petrus getting a call, right? And Eric tells Petrus that he has discovered a way. So Eric instructs Petrus to come back to the tower, to which Petrus does. And Eric discovers, or explains to Petrus that he has built a portal-like device, a portal frame, and to activate it and traverse between the mortal plane and the Feywild, he needs 7 artifacts from very powerful mythical creatures. It does not matter which ones. And Petrus doesn't have to kill them, per se. He just needs to grab something off of them. One which example that Eric gives him is the mighty phoenix. The bird, not unlike Petrus himself, immortal. One feather from the entire phoenix would be enough to contribute as one of the 7 artifacts. But he can't have just 7 feathers, or that would not lead to the Feywild. That would lead to the plane of fire, where the phoenix originates from. They need a broad diversity of artifacts to channel and direct the portal to the Feywild. So, Petrus starts out and he asks, you know, which way should we go? Which direction should I head first? And Eric begins to speak of he knows of a being known locally as a Loch Ness monster. And directs Petrus to go there. But about midway through the directions, Eric's radio cuts on. Randomly, unprompted by either of the elves standing in the room. And it's on a channel talking about the weather and how there's a great storm blowing in over the area where the Loch Ness Monster normally resides. And it's ordering evacuations of all local residents. Eric and Petrus, confused at the sudden and rather convenient weather report from an unprompted radio, don't question it farther and just assume that it's the radio on the fritz. Eric unplugs it, and they choose the next plan. The Phoenix. Eric strongly recommends Petrus to learn some more offensive spells. Petrus says there's no time, and I'm not looking to kill them. Diplomacy isn't dead. We can ask the Phoenix for one of its feathers. It shouldn't be too hard. Eric insists that Petrus at least have a traveling companion. Up until this point, Petrus has not many people who know of him enough to where they would be considered friends, but one such person by the name of Olvo Iyer. Olvo is a not terribly bright person, but he's strong. He can wield swords twice his length. And Olvo Iyer regards Petrus to a high authority, because Petrus saved his sister from falling into the river, which is not an inherently heroic thing. Petrus just kind of did it on a whim, because I don't need wood, I need dirt. Petrus just did it because he was in the right place at the right time. But Petrus requests the aid of Olvo. Olvo graciously accepts. And it's at this point that Petrus reveals to Olvo that he is an elf. Olvo, not knowing or really caring enough about the old story, it matters not to him. What he cares about is how Petrus is as a person. And to him, he's the guy who saved his sister from falling into the river. So they head out to try to challenge the first of those mythological beasts, the Phoenix. Petrus still keeping logs in his journal of every day. Him and Olvo go, and they battle the Phoenix, I guess. This is where the story starts to taper off, because I had the entire like prologue area completely done, which would be up to this point, and like the main goal done. They meet another character after the Phoenix named Lavender. Lavender Amara. And she is a normal human girl with purple eyes and such. But let's see. Story time. Where does the story go from there? About, let's see, after the third mythological beast, and it's all going to be like different ones from different mythologies. Like there's you need the feather of the phoenix, right? You need the scale of a Loch Ness monster. One of which was going to be the claw of the chupacabra. Another was going to be like the antler of what's that? A jackalope? The little like weird rabbit thing that has antlers. But the final one was going to be the gear. Jackalope, yeah. It was going to be the gear of a time traveler's watch. Now, it didn't need to be the watch that he uses to time travel, but any gear that is not from this timeline, that is originally used in a watch, would have been enough. But about 3 creatures in, you know, Petrus, Olvo, and Lavender, stumble upon a town that has a cult issue. And this cult is located just outside of the town. So they, you know, it's on the way. So they decide to help out, largely due to Lavender's influence. They decide to deal with the cult, either through diplomatic means or more physical ones, thanks to Olvo. But as they get into the cult's hideout, they quickly discover that it is a maze of sorts. A maze of mirrors and twists and turns, and they eventually stumble deep enough into the cult's hideout to find that there's this one ginormous mirror. And up to this point, Petrus, being the immortal he is largely self-sacrificing, because up to this point, he values the usefulness of both Lavender and Olvo in their various different ways of handling situations. So he approaches the mirror. In case anything happens, he will almost certainly regen. And as he approaches, the colors, they shift, they change, they alter. And Petrus's hair goes from silver to jet black in the mirror, not in the real world. His eyes change from an emerald green to blood red. His normal purple hoodie goes yellow. And what stands before him in the mirror is a man not completely unlike himself, but also very different at the same time. And in a action to try to see if there was some weird film or magic on the mirror, he reaches out to try to detect anything. But when he does, the hand that also reaches out in the mirror reaches farther and grabs Petrus's wrist. And instead of pulling Petrus in, he pulls himself out. So there standing is now Petrus and Mirror Petrus. I can never think of a good name for him, because I was like, oh, maybe it should be Petrus's name backwards, but Petrus's name backwards is really fucking dumb. So I just call him Mirror Petrus. And Mirror Petrus has a completely different outlook and upbringing. Rather than just being a world where everything is opposite. This is a world where the timeline divulged at one particular moment in time. Petrus the Third's rejection of the witch Lillian Vex. Petrus the Fourth of the Mirror World, Mirror Petrus, is the son of Petrus the Third and Lillian Vex. So not only is he incredibly powerful and skilled, but also his genesis is different. Now, it was unknown to this time, but through different tests secretly run by Eric, getting too many damn names in here, Eric discovered that Petrus's genesis, which was extremely difficult to detect, is actually that of void. Which, if you remember, from Petrus's mother and father being opposite elements, normally it would either pick one of the two or make a combination of both. But in a very, very rare mutation, it seems, they both canceled out. And Petrus was left with what is essentially emptiness. That doesn't mean he lacks emotions or anything of the sort. It's just the fact of he doesn't have anything worthwhile in a genesis. Mirror Petrus, on the other hand, not having that issue, with Lillian Vex being his mother, decides, or has the genesis of, I never decided on a good name, but it's essentially copy. If someone uses magic within the vicinity, he can basically copy that magic without having to know it, which usually magic, requires you to study and like research and all this jazz. Mirror Petrus doesn't have to do that with his genesis, which is it's basically just cheating. But what's a good villain without some cheating? And they do battle the best they can. Petrus forbidding either Olvo or Lavender get involved. For he does not want them to suffer from something that he or any version of him will do. So he battles Mirror Petrus, and Petrus not knowing any magic, it is largely just a fist fight between two string beans, until Mirror Petrus detects, once he grabs Petrus by the waist and attempts to drop him to the ground, detects that Petrus has very important magical items on his possession. Now, for the reason why, Mirror Petrus doesn't care. But he wants those magical items, for he knows with them he could win this fight. So he manages to steal one of them, the Phoenix Feather. And with it, he gains not only the ability to fly, but also the ability of fire. Now, the reason why Mirror Petrus is doing this, not just because, oh, evil guy is evil, it's because Petrus is immortal. And Mirror Petrus, knowing that, because, you know, he can copy magics, so while he's in range of Petrus, he is immortal. Um, he wants to steal Petrus's magic and take it for his own. But obviously, Petrus, not wanting that, fights back. But, you know, cut back to the stealing of the thing. It is at this point that, with Mirror Petrus having the power of flight, that Olvo and Lavender step in. Now, granted, Lavender, while very good at diplomacy and a lot of things, is not very good at combat. But for some reason, in this moment, Lavender shouts in desperation for them to stop, or there will be no winner. And while Petrus doesn't stop, because why the fuck would he? He's immortal. He will just regen if he gets hurt. Mirror Petrus halts and is frozen. And he does not know why. And it is that moment, that opportunity that takes, that Petrus grabs Mirror Petrus, takes the Phoenix Feather away from him, and pulses magic into him to hopefully knock him out. Because it's one of the very few offensive things he learned. Which is just, it's just like you just pour mana into someone and then it kind of like overloads them and they just pass out for, it's not very effective because the mana equalizes very quickly. You got like 5 minutes. But when he does this, because they are technically the same person, just different timeline, the mana is exactly the same, and Petrus's Void Genesis activates, fully consuming and absorbing Mirror Petrus inside of Petrus. And that is how you get a shonen protagonist to actually have powers when he starts off the show with nothing. So now there would be a short, you know, like recovery session, but basically Petrus can now use the abilities of Mirror Petrus with caveats. Mirror Petrus displayed abilities to copy multiple magics at once. Petrus can only do one at a time, and he can't do it nearly to the potency that Mirror Petrus could. He has to limit himself to about 46%. Because any higher than that, and he struggles to stay in control. He ate him, basically. Om nom nom. And as they close in on completing their goal with more and more, the final piece eludes them. Now keep in mind, something I didn't mention. So the elf is into Vor. No. No. Not at all. That shit's weird. Through this whole story, several things that I didn't mention because I can only think of one example at the time. Several things like the radio, where it steers them in a certain direction, is happening. And Petrus meets with what the fuck is his name again? Athos. Athos is the time traveler. And Athos explains to him and hands him a book not unlike his own. Like his own journal. Same enchanted, help with done by Eric, to be infinite number of pages, explaining what has happened to the world after Petrus lost control, with dates listing dates that had yet to happen. So this time traveler explains to Petrus that this is not his journal, but this is one from the future, from a future version of him, on where he absorbed Mirror Petrus and could not contain it. For if he goes over the percent limit and lets loose upon the world, there will be no one left to stop it. For the only thing holding Mirror Petrus back before their initial confrontation was the fact that he couldn't very well leave the cult's house without immortality. Which is what Petrus has. It's the one thing he does have over Mirror Petrus. So, the time traveler tells him that he needs to go and meet with his previous self. As in, the previous self of the time traveler, not the previous self of Petrus. And they do, and Petrus explains the situation to him, to which the time traveler is taken aback, but not, too incredulously shocked. Getting a messenger telling him about himself is nothing new. There's been several occurrences of this already to that time traveler, where he has had to fix several other things that might have potentially led to the end of the world, if not worse. So Petrus does, and the time traveler agrees to help them. And they battle the one last creature, which is I can never decide, because I wanted it to be something big, something crazy, something to like, why the fuck would you do this? Like, this is dumb. So I decided on in Castlevania style, Death, the concept of Death himself, which I thought was going to be really interesting. And like, you needed a cloth, a cut of the cloth from the Reaper. So, with the time traveler's help, they get the seventh piece. But not before Petrus, obviously getting attacked by Death incarnate, and Death being surprised, for he cannot take Petrus's soul, for it is bound to another. And he says that to Petrus, which doesn't surprise Petrus, for Eric had already given him the gist of why Petrus was how he was, but it confirmed it. For who else is a better reassurance than the actual Grim Reaper? So, all three of them return. They bid adieu to the time traveler with no more conflicts needed. Petrus doesn't need to use Mirror Petrus's power anymore. And they put all of the different mythological creatures, relics, trophies, whatever, into the portal, and they fire it up. And they traverse back to the Feywild. And Eric, not allowed to leave his tower still, no matter the area, transports them to where Morana Dorai should have been, but readies the group, for it has been almost 11,000 years. So as they arrive, they find completely different landscape, completely different styles of architecture, styles of roads. Some similar, very few are similar. Very few buildings remain. One such building that still remains, although in very bad shape comparatively, is the castle. And with it, the castle's library. So, posing as tourists, almost, for they realize that this world has advanced alongside the new generations and new peoples of the elves. Now, granted, there's not been that many generations compared to humans in 11,000 years, but it's still enough of elves for a kingdom to fall to ruin, and for people to only know of it in books. For the land that it once sat on is completely foreign to what it once was. And they learn more about the how the kingdom came to fall. And it was indeed after the royal family all disappeared in a single night. No trace left behind. No evidence discovered. Petrus, angry at that news, because he had hoped to find some lead on who killed his parents, decides to take a gander into the castle. And, you know, what would normally be off limits to visitors, Petrus knows his way around the castle because, you know, he fucking lived there. And he makes his way back up to his parents' chamber, which is extremely off limits to visitors. It's like, you know, you're not allowed to go into certain places of the Roman Colosseum. Kind of like that vein. And he wanders around looking at the things in the room and reminiscing. And then he remembers that his mother had a secret compartment hidden in the ceiling, just behind the left side of the chandelier, hanging over the bed. Not over the bed, over the floor at the foot of the bed. It'd be weird if you had your chandelier over the bed. So Petrus manages to stand on Olvo's shoulders enough to reach the top of the ceiling and draws the same rune that his mother would always draw whenever she wanted to access that vault. And inside, he finds a note and a necklace. It's a silver chain necklace with a square emerald inlaid into it. This is not what I need. I needed dirt. So I came over here. I'm getting distracted talking about shit. And his mother basically tells, you know, if this is a note that she hopes never is needed, is never used, and she hopes he never reads it. But on the off chance that he ever has to, it is almost certainly because something terrible has happened. The brick. Yes, the brick. But she wishes to leave this necklace to Petrus in hopes that he may discover its secrets and find better uses for it. So Petrus takes it, and then seeing no further reason to stay, him, Lavender, and Olvo leave. They take the necklace, sneak back out, and they head back to the rendezvous point where they agreed to with Eric ahead of time on where they should leave. Petrus contacts Eric with the stone, and then they walk back into the prime material plane. For this plane is no longer the home he desired. There's no reason to stay, to hang around and only cause more attention to himself than needed. But in allowing Eric to research more of the necklace while keeping a very strong eye on him, he discovers that the necklace has the ability, and he is flabbergasted at this ability because he did not know such an item could exist. It has the ability to plane shift. The only issue is he does not see a way to trigger it. And it is almost as if the necklace has a will of its own. For he cannot get it to activate, and anytime Petrus tried, he also could not get it to activate. Brick lore, fuck yeah. Yeah, I finally figured out what the fuck to do with the brick. That's like the one addendum I had to the original story is the necklace. And that would have been the end of the original book series. Now, on the off chance that A, the book series did well, B, it did so well that it was like, let's have a second series like they did for Percy Jackson. I was going to make it so they go back into the Feywild, or I was going to include it, depending on how the books were going up to that point, I was going to include it in the final, where they were researching more about the how the kingdom fell. I remember the message when you figured it out. It was really early in the morning. Yeah, I was sitting up thinking about that shit. It was going to be they when they discovered how the kingdom fell, they were going to actually find that it was a cult or something similar led by Lillian Vex. So Petrus, not knowing that that is the same person who cursed him, just knowing it's the people who killed his parents, that would have been the main plot of the second book series, which I haven't really thought out, but it would take place mostly in the Feywild for a whole new setting. Um, and Petrus would have to probably find some other magical artifact that he could copy, because without the magical artifacts to make the portal, because they're all still being used in the portal to get to the Feywild originally, he doesn't have any powers anymore. Which, all the powers, all the different magical artifacts did different stuff. The Phoenix Feather, I didn't fucking replant the wheat. I'm an idiot. Should have called me out on that. Like the jackalope antler would give increased speed and like jump height. The scale of the Loch Ness monster would give like ability to breathe underwater and swim very fast. These are all very basic powers, because if he ever overloaded, which just going above 50%, not only would he have to fight off the power of Mirror Petrus in his mind, but he would also gain more powers from the individual artifacts. Like, I think the time traveler's gear, which granted I don't think he would ever have a chance to use that, but if he did, it would allow him to. I didn't want to stop time because that felt really fucking cheesy, but then they, since then I found out that that's the fucking main power of an enemy stand in JoJo. I'm kind of leaning towards fucking just making it stop time. I was originally gonna have it like slow down time so he could like, take reactions better, I guess, or do things faster. But like, your time just stops for 5 seconds. The world, yeah. Uh, so it would probably be something similar to that. Um, but yeah, that is most of the story originally. Um, there's a stronger stand in the world. Yeah, Star Platinum. I've watched all of JoJo. Sorry, ugh, my lip is chapping, and I hate wearing chapstick. So it's like, ugh, it's like dry, and it's Christ, how long did I talk about that for? When did Lucky send the Uwu? Because that was like at the start. Uh, Christ, that was over an hour. Oh my God. You gotta use chapstick. Take care of your skin. Don't tell me what to do. So yeah, I hoped you liked my fucking hour long spiel of lore, I guess. I'm not even sure if that is like 100%. I think the lore of Petrus the Vtuber instead of Petrus, the main character of a book series I was going to write in high school, is going to be the necklace takes me to the different worlds, because every VTuber is by and large in their own world. And my book is what I use to write down their lore in, because I really like stories, which I do. I am a quite an avid fan of people's lore and how they write it and present themselves. Which is that's a lot dumbed down, but you know. I have a magic book that never ends, so I can keep writing all the stories. And I have a necklace that takes me to different worlds. So it's not like anything is too far out there.